we're coming off of Saitama successfully, quote-unquote, defeating Tatsumaki, I guess you could say, or just convincing her to simply be a better person. He's coming back to his apartment, and he's seeing his 3 A-class hero neighbors there, Forte, Chain and Toad, and Butterfly DX, and Forte suddenly has like a 180 in his personality. He's even taking off his glasses and his beanie. Like, we haven't even seen this in the webcomic. Like, this is the first reveal of what he looks like. And he's just, you know, completely pandering to Saitama, being like, hey, you know, you're cool, and if you need anything, just let me know. Let's hang out. All right, bye. And his big personality change is, of course, because he saw Saitama in the midst of his battle against Tatsumaki and realized that he is at the minimum S-class level, if not even beyond that. But this sequence ends with Forte telling Butterfly DX and Chain and Toad, like, hey, better make sure to take good care of that dog too. Let's get Saitama on our side. And it's coming back to me questioning, what is Forte's purpose in this series? Like, what is his ultimate goal? What is his character arc going to be? Because I'm still confused by that. Like, it seems like he has some kind of significance that he is ultimately going to fulfill, and I just hope it's not just him nurturing Rover and Black S for their rise to power. But we cut back to underneath the Hero Association. We're seeing like the mound of monster corpses that Saitama took care of. But this leads to us seeing some of the Hero Association executives coming down to the basement and observing the quote-unquote crime scene. I don't know what you would call this, but we actually recognize at least 2 of these guys. But I know this American looking guy on the right here because he is the executive from chapter 85, I think, in the Viz, that says the iconic line of like, "Call Blast! Where's Blast?" And that's exactly why I remember this guy, because I read that chapter like 1,000 times, because like for many years it was like one of the very few instances of Blast being mentioned in the manga. So I'm happy that they're sticking with the continuity of bringing this guy back, who doesn't have a name. I'll just call him Walter because he looks like a Walter, but I'm probably gonna forget that I said that anyway. But the other significant guy here is McCoy. I think the only other time we saw him in the manga's continuity was like in a bonus chapter, the Pork Cutlet Bowl one, where like Saitama helps out the police against the surprise attack plum monster, and McCoy was like full-blown heel in that chapter. But now in this chapter, he's more of like a tweener, and I gotta say, I really like it. But anyway, when they come down, they immediately get exposed by Eyelashes. And he's like, there's no way you association executives came all the way out here for something, but don't have any idea who Tsukuyomi is. And of course, they play it off, act like they don't know who that is, but clearly they do, because they were ready to sell Psychos to Tsukuyomi. And then after this, Gearspur enters the conversation, and what he says here blows my freaking mind. So he's like, Tsukuyomi, that's the name of a secret society from some urban legend that's been around for a long time in our Esper circles. To be honest, it's a completely ridiculous rumor. Perhaps the survivors from the Monster Association decided to come back and take Psychos under the guise of some kind of trade-off. Wouldn't that make sense? It seems there were a number of other Espers in the Monster Association after all. And even Eyelashes and Needlestar are like a little skeptical of him. They're like, I guess. And then we see McCoy like blow out his cigar smoke, and he knows what's up. He knows that Gearspur is BSing here. And that's what's blowing my mind. This is the official heel turn of Gearspur. He was an inside agent from Tsukuyomi this whole time, and I did not know it. He came across as like a straightforward babyface for the longest time, but no. And we speculated before that he was at least a result of the experimentation of Tsukuyomi. And I thought maybe, you know, he was resentful of them, or maybe didn't know what they did and kind of just wasn't still affiliated with them. I even speculated that he was maybe Apollo's brother, and I do think that's all true. He is with Tsukuyomi, and he is one of Tsukuyomi's inside men, inside of the Hero Association here. But not only that, we also talked about the helmet that he is wearing. My opinion, this is tied to the organization. So that means that Gearspur is tied to 2 of the 3 paths of God. So this guy, kind of a significant villain, hiding in plain sight, just like Drive Knight. But anyway, Fubuki comes down and starts talking to McCoy, and she says to McCoy that to think you would be secretly taking care of demon level monsters underground, ones that weren't even on the containment list. What's going on here? He's like, well, the monsters were being used for the implementation of a top secret weapon that Metal Knight has been developing. And that is true. That's the original original intended purpose for the monsters being down there. However, we also find out what it's also being used for, which Metal Knight is also aware of, but he doesn't condone it. We found this out from the Squadron bonus chapter, because Fubuki says, what exactly then is this evidence I have here of you trying to trade those monsters off to an outside organization for a huge sum of money? Now, this isn't exactly what was happening in the Squadron bonus chapter. It was other executives who were selling off monsters for like black market stuff. But this, while similar, is different because the organization, quote unquote, that McCoy is selling these monsters to is not yet revealed. We will know eventually. Actually, I don't even think it's been fully revealed in the webcomic, but in my opinion, the organization that he is selling these monsters to is the freaking organization. You know, the cyborg dudes. And I can't go too much into that, but soon you'll realize that they have been pulling the strings on a lot of things. And Fubuki's like, well, it would be a huge scandal if this went public, right? And McCoy's like, all right, what is it you want? And long story short, Fubuki just wants to cover up what Tatsumaki has done here. Absolve her of her wrongdoing in the eyes of the public and the Hero Association, because she did have a meltdown and was like a serious liability, not only to the Hero Association, but also to human existence. And now that she's, you know, calmed down and had a soft character arc via Saitama defeating her, Fubuki's like, you know, let's just cover this up. Let's regain her face in the public by just having all of these corpses spread over the craters outside, and then just tell the public that Tatsumaki was fighting all of these demon monsters that just coincidentally grouped together to attack the Hero Association. And then I won't have to leak that you were selling these monsters to another organization. And McCoy's like, you know, I like it, as expected of the witch, and I like it too. I like this interaction because this is more true to who Fubuki is. And I'm glad that one is taking her back to this type of demeanor, because I was worried that he was going to turn her too much into a Mary Sue. And I also like the way that McCoy is handling this, because he's like, yeah, it's just business. I get it. Nothing personal. So that's why I'm saying that, like, McCoy is like a tweener character. He's somewhere in between good and evil, but leaning towards evil more so. But I do think by the end of this arc, McCoy will have like a serious character arc where he ultimately winds up helping humanity and the heroes. But we find out that they're killing two birds with one stone in this sequence, where not only are they covering up this incident and saving face for Tatsumaki, but they're also smuggling Psychos out of there. Tatsumaki is of course on board with this because this is also a part of her plan as well. They don't want the Hero Association to have Psychos anymore because they can't be trusted. They were going to straight up sell her to Tsukiyomi, and you definitely don't want Tsukiyomi having Psychos because she has the third eye ability, or at least part of it, and she has direct contact with God and has had a power up. And that's exactly why Fubuki has Psychos here. She's trying to get to the bottom of what exactly happened to her, not only during the Monster Association War, but what happened to her in high school when she tapped into the third eye ability. But anyway, all that stuff transpires, and we see the media completely covering the new narrative of Tatsumaki saving the Hero Association. We even see Saitama like checking this out on TV in some ramen shop that he's in, and he's like upset at first that she's taking the credit, but then he hears about all of the billions of dollars of damage done to the billion, and then once he finds out about that, he's like, well, they're reporting it as Tatsumaki's accomplishment. We might as well let her have some of the time in the limelight, Genos. And then Genos, of course, eats this up. Then we come to the final page of the chapter, and we see Child Emperor discovering everything that we just talked about, how everything is being covered up and everything is a fraud. And this is going to be a snowball effect that is going to change the story forever, like what this ultimately leads to. And I cannot wait for it to play out in the manga. So this chapter starts off with us seeing Tatsumaki being called by the Hero Association to come in to make a commercial for them in order to recruit new heroes, because they're kind of low on them, but also like the super powerful ones. And of course she refuses at first because she's Tatsumaki. Naturally she would, but then she remembers what Saitama told her in the previous arc. Up until not too long ago, I couldn't even beat a wolf level monster, which is, you know, take it for what you will. We saw what he did against a tiger level in Crablante, but I won't hold it against Saitama here. But that makes her reconsider, because she's like, well, if Saitama went from below wolf to one above all in quote unquote not too long, then I guess there are other sleeping giants out there that we should give a chance. Which is like big for Tatsumaki. Like we talked about in the previous arc, Saitama has shown her the light, both figuratively and literally. And she winds up making the commercial, and of course she does things her own way, and they wind up just editing it in post with AI, which is like hilarious because that's like the new buzzword nowadays. I'm personally a big fan of AI generated art. I'm not one to gatekeep stuff like that, so go ahead and make all the stuff you can with it, guys, while we have the chance. I'm sure it'll be cracked down on by the government eventually. But the final product winds up being salacious, of course, because, you know, that sells. And we see this guy watching the commercial from a street, and he's approached by Shizuka, who's a scout from the Hero Association. We find out this guy's name is Axel, and that he's actually been approached before, but we'll come back to him because we're cutting over to the Hero Association executives in their roundtable, and they're talking about how the commercial went over well and how it's improving their eyes in the public, and they're all like congratulating McCoy for this because he essentially orchestrated all of this. And McCoy says, haha, come on now. It's all for the sake of the organization. And yes, if you were wondering if I'm going to say, does this mean like the organization with the cyborgs? Yes. But I don't think McCoy is like literally aware that he is saying like the organization referring to the cyborgs. I think he is referring to the Hero Association. And maybe another thing that I can't really mention yet because it would be spoilers. But outside of McCoy's dialogue here, it's more so one winking at the audience with a little double entendre here, because I think one, you know, the author is actually saying the organization, like the cyborg guys, because in my opinion, they are pulling McCoy's strings, but he is not aware of it yet. I mean, this isn't like a spoiler. It's not revealed even in the webcomic, but I think in a few years, this will all come back around and, you know, we'll know the truth. Another thing about McCoy here that I didn't get a chance to talk about yet, I'll just mention it here and maybe make it a short later on, but his eye patch, I think, is showing his story, because the eye patch is covering his right eye. And I'm not going to go too much into this stuff because I know it angers some people, but if you watch my Truth About One Punch Man series, I pointed out how one likes to storytell through left and right imagery, most prominently through the eyes. Like, long story short, the left eye means bad, the right eye means good. And we see that McCoy's right eye is being covered. And the star, like, marking on it is extremely similar to the markings that we see on Tatsumaki's hands after she's stabbed by, like, those lances from the Sairochi God power-up thing. I don't think it's a coincidence. I'm pretty sure it's telling us that McCoy probably lost his eye to a monster or something, or God or whatever, and it's showing us how he lost his innocence or morality. It has something to do with God for sure. If not directly by him, just by proxy through like a monster or a cyborg or an Esper, you know, something, you know, one of the three paths that come from God. And now that only his left eye is exposed, it's showing that, like, yeah, he's pretty much a bad guy right now. But like I said before, I think he will come full circle and he will have this great character arc where he's ultimately a good guy. But that's like years from now, probably. Again, not a spoiler. This hasn't been revealed even in the webcomic. I'm just speculating. But going further, another executive just randomly brings up Metal Knight. And he's like, yeah, it sure lowered our confidence in Metal Knight even further, that big talking delinquent. First, there's the failure of his guard robots, and then there's the flimsiness of the building we're in. I can't believe he called it an impregnable fortress after all the money it took to have this place built. And this is also another little trick by one, the author, by continuing to show us that the Hero Association is losing trust in Metal Knight, but also to influence the reader to lose trust in Metal Knight as well, because he wants us to be suspicious of him, and he wants us to think that, like, Drive Knight is the cool guy. Because remember, this all started with Drive Knight telling Genos that Metal Knight is your enemy. And we see Metal Knight reviewing the footage of Saitama destroying his robots, and even him having his scuffle with Tatsumaki, and he's like, darn you, Cape Baldy. And this isn't like Metal Knight being like a villain towards Saitama. He's justified in feeling this way because he's not reading the story as we are. He doesn't have all of the context here. So from his perspective, he just sees some guy destroying his robots and ruining his reputation with the Hero Association. So naturally, he should feel this way. Then they further talk about Tatsumaki and how she's like a loose cannon and it would be hard to control her. They say it would be like trying to ride a bomb, which is interesting. I think that's like reference to Doctor Strangelove maybe. But I think this is setting up Tatsumaki for kind of like a World War Hulk type situation. This isn't a spoiler, but I do think it will eventually come down to that. If you're familiar with how World War Hulk started in Civil War, I think Tatsumaki is going to kind of play a similar role there eventually. But we also find out that they haven't found any alternative sources of manpower, and they haven't seen any sign of increase in hero applicants, despite their campaign being well received and their approval rating increasing from the public. And we find out it's because there's a brand new hero organization recruiting heroes. And this is essentially what the next big saga of One Punch Man is going to be about. Like, we're not going to directly go into what this new hero organization's like big saga is immediately. There is going to be some stuff that needs to be established before that, but if you're wondering like what's the next big long saga of One Punch Man, like with the Monster Association saga, how that was like super long, it's going to be about this new rival hero organization. But we see this guy Excel sitting down with Shizuka, the recruiter from the Hero Association, and she's basically like telling him about the shortcomings of the Hero Association, saying like the S class is unreliable, A class just keeps adding to the ranks of being injured. You know, we need to replenish our fighting forces, you know, especially coming off the war and everything. And Excel's like, you know, replenish. You make them sound like expendable goods. That's why you need me, huh? And we find out that he's the leader of a vigilante group named Hunters. So this is why he looks like a hero, although he's not, you know, that a vigilante. And he also downplays the Hero Association as well by saying like, I heard you guys got played hard by a lone hero hunter. And this is understandable. This is like typically how people in the One Punch Man world act, and you can't really blame him because he doesn't have all of the information. He doesn't know Garo went cosmic mode and became his Astral level god. He has no idea. He just assumes that Garo was probably still the way that he was like when he fought Metal Bat. But Shizuka breaks down the Hero Association to its bare essentials here, and she says the majority of our budget is being spent on maintaining our approval ratings, including things such as compensation for damages to the area caused by hero activities. Our sponsors are always monitoring the Hero Association's approval ratings after all, and what was floated around as our answers to that had you on the forefront, Mr. Axel. So it's like, yeah, the Hero Association doesn't really care. It's just a business at the end of the day. And it's a very corrupt business at that. This is more social commentary by one, of course, as well as just showing that they are incompetent. Because it's really interesting that they're going after Excel here and the Hunters, because in my opinion, at least, these guys aren't really that powerful. And this isn't like a spoiler or anything, but we find out more or less how strong Excel and the Hunters are here, because she says you've already had a proven record of eliminating disaster level demon, and we hear that you have strong support from the people. But he's like, no, there's actually 48 of us now. 5 men died in the fight against that level demon. So yeah, if Excel along with 52 other people like were pushed to their limits to defeat a demon, it's like, yeah, he's, I don't know, like top 10 A class level. She even guarantees him a position in the S class, which I don't think he is worthy of. That's just how desperate they are, and incompetent as well. And Excel's like, you know, this isn't about treatment. Most of us hunters have lost someone dear to them in a monster disaster in the past, so we don't trust the Hero Association. This might seem petty, but it kind of does parallel to our own reality, with like people having distrust for the police and whatnot, you know, if they weren't able to help them in certain situations or whatever. And he's like, you know, you gather all that money and all that manpower, but in the end, all you're interested in is protecting a small group of rich people, which is ultimately the truth. Like I was saying, they're just a business at the end of the day. And their business just happens to be defending the public from monsters using heroes as mascots. But it's not like they're being altruistic about it. It's kind of similar to how Vought is from The Boys. If you haven't seen that on Amazon, I strongly check it out. It's an easy 10 out of 10 series. Not the comics, the Amazon show. But he's like, the Hero Association isn't working in the public interest anymore. You know, we have no desire to put ourselves in the middle of that and risk getting corrupted in the same way, which is like hilarious and expert level writing from one here. I can't really go into that, but in a couple years I'll come around to that statement maybe. But he ends up saying like the Hero Association won't be around much longer. You should start looking for another job as soon as you can. And I don't think that's so much as like a threat as like, yeah, we're gonna take them down. I think he means more so they're going to implode and destroy themselves, which if you look at the trajectory of things, it's very likely. Again, that isn't a spoiler. This hasn't played out in the webcomic. So then we come over to another new rival S-class type of hero guy, and it's this sumo champion Raiden. Now, the exposition we're getting on this guy is hyping him up big time. And I can't confirm or deny if he is S-class level. And they do say that, you know, working on our side as an S-class hero, morale would improve greatly. So considering that they said the same thing to Excel, it makes me wonder, like, is this guy just like a really powerful A-class guy and they're just giving him what he wants just to guarantee that he joins? In my opinion, and I'll tell you what I felt about Raiden when he was first revealed in the webcomic like 5 years ago. I thought that he was legitimately S-Class at that time because he just looks the part. So I'll just stick with that for now. But we come back to Excel ending his conversation with Shizuka, and he says, moving forward, members of the Hunters will also be a part of them. That's another interesting thing. We're not getting the name of this new hero organization, so I won't spoil it in this review, but it will probably be revealed in the next chapter. But he also says several of the Hero Association sponsor companies are also planning to move over. Naturally, they've also reached out behind the scenes to several S-Class heroes. So that's fascinating. It's like, are S-Class heroes going to leave the Hero Association and join this new group? And considering that this was said here, it kind of has to happen, right? It would just be way anticlimactic if that doesn't happen, if he just said this for no reason, right? I'm not going to say this is Chekhov's gun, but it's almost kind of like that. And considering what happened at the end of the previous chapter with a certain hero discovering corruption in the Hero Association, it makes sense that some are going to be more susceptible to maybe accepting offers or even entertaining them. Because coming into the final page here, we see Genos with Dr. Kuseno receiving a new upgrade, looking cool. How powerful is this? I have no idea. I doubt it's like surpassing his power in the Monster Association War, because that was more reliant on like his core maxing out and the 10% stuff of it. But Kuseno's technology doesn't really ever make sense, so maybe he is stronger than 10-second Genos, or just as strong as him consistently, and doesn't have to be reliant on the 10-second boost or whatever. But just to be safe, I'll say Genos is like for sure dragon level at this point, maybe top 10 level in the S-Class, possibly. Just taking a guess. But Kuseno says, you did say you had some suspicions about the Hero Association. And he says, and so it's like, is Genos going to join the new hero organization? Is he leaving the Hero Association? It's like, it's a good cliffhanger here because we don't know. But let me know what you think in the comment. Which S-Class heroes do you think are leaving the Hero Association? And again, even if you think you already know because you read the webcomic, just keep in mind that the manga's continuity is different. There could be major surprises here. So just keep that in mind. So coming off of the previous chapter, we found out that there was a new rival hero organization being developed. And at the end of that chapter, we saw Dr. Kuseno giving Genos his new upgrades that we're going to see in this chapter. And he asks him, is that so? And what do you plan on doing, Genos, in reference to the association? Because he says that you did say that you had some suspicions about the Hero Association, and Genos is like, and we don't get to hear what he says, and he's also not going to talk about that in this chapter, but we'll get more into Genos at the end of the video. But coming into this one, we see Flashy Flash doing some really great investigative work, and surprisingly so, but I guess being a ninja, this is like part of his training or whatnot, because he's asking monsters about God. This is super important. But also we have to keep in mind that Flashy Flash is one of the very few heroes who is actually aware of God. He first found out about him after touching the cube with Saitama and Monako, but then Blast showed up and kind of gave him more insight, but also didn't, because I guess Blast feels it's better if everyone knows less about God. That way they'll be more safe. But the monster doesn't know what he's talking about, and Flash says, I suppose fodder like you wouldn't know. And this is completely understandable, because while monsters do come from God, in my opinion, like all of them, they're not aware of him, because that's like God's whole thing. He more so wants to be behind the scenes, pulling the strings invisibly. Like, it's very rare that he explicitly makes himself known to someone. Like, so far it's only really been Homeless Emperor. But then we find out like the real main reason why he came here, aside from asking about God, because he's asking about Monako, which is hilarious. It's like, hey, do you know where this monster went? And the fodder monster doesn't know. But then we get some more inner dialogue on Flash, and he's like, she's one of the few direct contacts to God I know of. But then he also says it'd be a pain if she were found by some other heroes and they hunted her down first. So he's trying to save her and protect her, of course. They develop this quiet camaraderie throughout their time during the Monster Association arc. Like, Flashy Flash does care about Monako, which is like big for him. And it's slowly developing his character arc, of course. And he's right about that, because My Mask almost straight up killed Monako, but she was conveniently saved by Saitama riding that aircraft carrier. And I really don't know what the future of Monako is, but it seems like she's going to be somewhat of a significant character. Now, also, she does have the singular eye, which makes me think that she is destined to be a villain. And I also, for some reason, see like a transformation in her future to where she's going to become like an attractive monster, because that just seems like where it's headed, especially since she made it explicitly clear that she was a woman. So maybe she gets like a god power up in the future and it leads to like Flashy Flash being more conflicted or something. But then he thinks about Saitama and he's like, you know, maybe I should get him to help too, because, you know, they were like the whole trio thing in the Monster Association. She was like their tour guide. And during the end of the Monster Association arc with all the Garo stuff going on, she was able to escape, and that's why she's currently MIA. But Flashy Flash continuing to remember Saitama, he's like, despite his looks, he had decent talent. With a top tier mentor, he could be of some use, and we see him just walk off. So yeah, Flashy Flash, of course, still living in denial about Saitama being the one above all, but it seems like this is where his story is headed for sure. He's going to track down Saitama and ask him about Minako, but then I guess also try to become his mentor. Then we come to Tank Top Master, and he's reverted back to his original body composition because he was just completely mangled by the cadres, and Fubuki wound up healing him by like transferring Pig God's fat energy into him. That's why we see like his obese form up in the top left. Then we're coming to a huge twist because we see Phoenix Man. Phoenix Man is now an adult again, I guess you could say, but still retaining his chick form, and he's like this crossing guard, and Child Emperor spots him. So the last time we saw Phoenix Man, or should I say Phoenix Chick Man, pretty sure that was like chapter 100, because at the end of his fight with Child Emperor was able to like sneak in this tickle bug robot into his costume with the assistance of Saitama, and it tickled him to the point of where he like, I don't know, had some kind of like crazy freak out, and it reverted him to this chick form. He wound up like getting kicked by Gale. And also remember, Gale and Hellfire are still out there. I don't know if they were fully arrested afterwards. It seems like they were, but I don't know, they're still out there, so just remember that. But they wind up going to this nearby cafe, and of course Child Emperor is suspicious of him and has like a gun held to him under the table, and he's like, no, calm down. Right now I'm just a powerless, rare creature trying to find a way of life in this society through acts of charity. And yeah, I don't buy this at all. I'm pretty sure he's lying. He's kind of just gaslighting Child Emperor because that's what he's always been doing. I assume that he is doing something similar to Black S here, where he's just regaining and building up his power essentially so that he can have like this massive comeback, which I think is inevitable. Like I was talking about how Minako might become a disciple of God. I'm positive that the future of Phoenix Man is him becoming one of God's main disciples. I actually made a video about this, but he says, you know, what do you want with me? And Child Emperor says, the dark side of the association that you showed me was real. Tell me the source of your intel, along with everything you know. So that's fascinating, because it also goes back to chapter 100. Before Phoenix Man was defeated, he took Child Emperor to like this psychic mind space place, and he was telling him all this stuff, and one of them was the crimes that the higher-ups of the Hero Association are doing behind the scenes. If that sick stuff is true or not. You've been helping a bunch of criminals without being aware of anything. And this is an instance of him actually telling the truth to Child Emperor, because we also found a couple chapters back that Child Emperor had like hacked into the Hero Association's network and uncovered some truly bad things, where he says, you know, the dark side. Now he's wondering like, you know, how do you know this, Phoenix Man? And to be honest, we don't really know, but I think it might have something to do with G5 coming into the Monster Association and maybe giving them information on the Hero Association that Drive Knight was able to steal from their servers, possibly. Again, this is all deep conspiracy stuff. None of this is remotely confirmed, but just taking a guess. Then we come to Darkshine, and he is having some serious PTSD now, but he also has scarring from Vomited Fura Ugly. Now, either this is scarring or it's stripped away his dark shine and it's reverting him back to his regular skin tone, or this is just severe scarring that's left him to look like this. But regardless, it's give him some distinguished markings, and he has PTSD because of him getting just schooled in the Monster Association battle against the cadres. And this is going to be Darkshine's main plot line going forward, for this arc at least. Then we come to Y City, and we see the forest folk invading it. So you can kind of think of these guys similar to like the sea folk. It's pretty much the same kind of thing, because they're like, we will restore green to this planet by fertilizing the earth on top of the corpses of the human race. That is our divine calling. So going back to what I was talking about at the beginning of the video, these are definitely a result of God. They even have like the God like fleshy aesthetic to them, kind of, although they are made of wood. Pretty sure God led to their creation for sure, but they're not aware. They say divine calling because that's all they really know. They don't know that it's literally like God pulling their strings. And I think he's giving them like this false motivation. Yes, the earth has been severely damaged by humans, especially in the One Punch Man world, but in my opinion, going into the research and stuff that I've done, I'm pretty sure it's because of God's influence on on people. So he's just giving them like this false narrative to motivate them. Although in the end, everything is because of God. But we see various heroes trying to take them on, further showing that like they're inferior to these monsters. And this is going to be a recurring theme going forward, just showing how the heroes of the Hero Association are getting weaker and weaker and more useless against these monsters as they get stronger progressively as time goes on. Then the tank toppers show up and they're able to help them out in this sequence. But then the boss monster shows up, the Forest King, who's freaking dragon level. Again, remember, this is like similar to the other kings that we've seen in the series. But he's about to take out multiple heroes until Genos shows up and just destroys seemingly all the forest folk with one blast. Like, this is crazy. Like, you could see it from the perspective of the city. And Genos is like, I see, this new firepower seems perfectly suitable. As I'd expect from Dr. Kuseno, I can battle dragon levels as well. And yeah, of course he can battle dragons. I mean, he was battling dragons in the Monster Association War. Granted, he had a different upgrade before. That's what I called his Daedric form. The form that he had before that gave him that 10-second mode, which he used against Psychos and Orochi. And I'm assuming that he no longer has that. He more so has like a streamlined version of what his suit was capable of before without that last 10-second Super Saiyan thing attached to it. Now, that's not confirmed. I'm just taking a guess. Then he also says, I'd like to ask Saitama Sensei for another sparring match. And that's fascinating because they haven't sparred since like season 1, or at least from what I remember. And Genos just takes out the Forest King with seemingly one blast. I mean, it's cutting to him meeting up with Saitama afterwards, but I think he just one-shots a dragon maybe, which is, yeah, incredible. Genos might even be high dragon in power at this point. Mid-dragon possibly, I don't know, but one-shotting a dragon, or at least the implication of one-shotting a dragon, is usually indicative of high dragon strength. But I think maybe in the next chapter, if not that, we'll get a name on this form, because it was named in the webcomic, but I don't want to say it in case it doesn't wind up having the same name, but it seems like it will. Has something to do with his core. But we see him meeting up with Saitama afterwards, and he's like, did you change parts again? He's like, yeah. So I guess this conversation is going to be pretty significant once we come back to it, because we need to find out what Genos is doing. Is he going to leave the Hero Association to join the new rival hero organization? Maybe, maybe not. We'll have to see what he says. And that's where the chapter ends. And you'll see that Vib included some supplementary info at the end of the chapter here, talking about what Murata said in relation to a break. I had made a video about this earlier on the channel, where I talked about an article that Anime Senpai had posted, where they translated what Murata said in a Twitter space, but apparently their translation wasn't really that accurate. And what Vib is basically saying here is that Murata didn't say anything about taking like a long break, or anything about his health being in decline, or him having problems or anything. He more so just said that he is low on time to do things like socialize, especially have time with his family. So he was just thinking about taking a short break, or he was going to talk to his family about that. So yeah, just wanted to clear that up. It doesn't seem like he's going to take a long break like what we possibly thought before, where I said maybe it was going to be a couple months, but him saying a short break here might be like maybe a month, couple weeks. We'll see what happens, but I wouldn't worry about it. In the end, Murata knows what's best for him. Even if he does decide to take a long break, he deserves it. But
so coming off of the previous chapter, we saw Genos responding to the Forest King attacking a city. This Forest King is a dragon level monster. And we also saw Genos' new upgrades, which in this chapter is being called Lightning Core. And it seems like he was easily able to deal with the Forest King. He also said that he'd like to ask Saitama for another sparring match. And that brings us into this chapter where he meets up with Saitama in his new apartment in the Hero Association, which they also discuss. And it eventually gets to the point of Genos asking Saitama for said sparring match. And they go out, and as they're making their way to the area where they're going to spar, Saitama says, man, there sure have been a lot of monsters lately. It's easier to find a monster than it is to find a stag beetle now. And the implication for this, or at least what it was kind of revealed a couple chapters back, is that it's because God is aware that Saitama removed his limiter. And since that's happened, he's kind of been ramping up the amount of monsters that have been coming out. Either through what he's done to mankind, you know, through them naturally becoming monsters, or him just straight up making them, which you know that he is absolutely capable of. As we saw that he just was able to make Sage Centipede. So this is more so in a response of Saitama more than anything. He's trying to make more monsters in order to compensate for that. But they get to where they're gonna fight, and Genos activates his lightning core, and it's super bright, and it just bothers Saitama. Like, he's closing his eyes, not even concerned about Genos, who's about to just level him. And before Genos connects, he stops his punch right before his face because he realizes that Saitama just isn't concerned with him at all. He's more so bothered by the light in his eyes. And we see a massive dust cloud behind Saitama from Genos' punch. And as I'm sure you've seen, this looks almost exactly the same to the dust cloud that Saitama left behind Genos when they first had their sparring match in season 1. This whole sequence is supposed to parallel to that because after Saitama left that dust cloud behind Genos had said at that time, like, I can't picture myself coming even close to attaining Teacher's powers. And considering what's happening now, it's more so supposed to show where Genos' mental state is at. Because in theory, he kind of has reached that. Now, of course, he's obviously not as strong as Saitama, but at least the dust cloud that they are able to create is at the same level. So obviously Genos has increased in power, but he isn't able to see that. And that's also going to be one of Genos's big downfalls leading further into the story, and it's that he keeps comparing himself to Saitama. Rather than seeing his own growth, he can only see that he is not on Saitama's level, which, you know, realistically, he never will be, because no one will, aside from, like, God, but that's a story for another time. But he asks Saitama, like, don't you think I've gotten just a little bit stronger? And Saitama says, well, you've changed your parts, right? I mean, I guess you got a little stronger. And Genos says, I wonder if changing my parts can truly make me stronger, though. And while it literally does, I mean, it's evident, it's more so going into like an existential statement, I suppose. It's like, is Genos becoming stronger from just changing his parts, or does he ultimately need to become stronger by changing who he is as a person? And also, who Genos is as a person is like barely there at this point. I mean, yeah, he still has his humanity for sure, but I mean, it's more so like on a biological level. Like, I think Genos is only like a brain at this point. I mean, I don't think we've ever got confirmation on how much Genos's biology is left or his human physiology, but I think it's just a brain, which could be playing more into what's going to happen much later down the line in this arc. But just like before, Saitama is struggling to find words to tell Genos here, trying to give him some kind of encouragement, because last time he said, hey, you know, reach the top 10 of the S class, and this time he's just like, yeah, you got a lot brighter at least, right? Yeah, Saitama's still not good with words. Both of these characters still have much development to go through for sure. But Genos, realizing that Saitama had just never been watching him, to be honest, even from the very start, he goes on to say that it's been over 2 months since he became his disciple. And that's fascinating because it's finally giving us a timeline of events, which this essentially means that 2 months of in-story time has passed since the beginning of the series. And that's kind of important because it lines up with Shibawa's prophecy, which came shortly after they had met, which of course is like, the world is in danger and it's probably going to happen 6 months from that time. So in theory, we have about, I don't know, 4 months until that's going to happen. Now, I don't know if that means it's literally going to play out the same way that it has already. There probably is going to be some kind of time skip, or time will just move faster at this point. But don't think that the series is coming to an end or anything. It's still, at least in my opinion, has another like at least 10 years of real time, because this arc is going to be very long, and then there's going to be like a third arc which might even be longer than that. But yeah, I just wanted to put that out there. But going further, Genos also says, you know, as weak as I was, you saw it fit to give me an initial assignment of making it into the top 10 of the hero rankings. And technically Genos could right now be in the top 10 of the hero rankings, at least power wise. I mean, there's no way to know for sure, especially since the hero rankings aren't predicated on power anyway. There's a lot of nonsense that goes into them, but considering the shakeup that's about to happen, we might get new hero rankings soon. Also, I wouldn't hold my breath on that, but I guess it is possible. It would be pretty exciting and interesting to me, at least. But then Genos starts talking about the new hero organization that we've been hearing about these last couple chapters, and it finally gets a name. They're called the Neo Heroes. And Genos is thinking about possibly joining them because he feels that he needs a change of environment. You know, being around God and Saitama, you know, the one above all the time, it's constantly putting him into this headspace that we were talking about. about. And that's another thing that is integral to Genos' growth, and it's that he ultimately needs to stop comparing himself to Saitama. It's like you playing basketball and you're constantly comparing yourself to LeBron. It's like, it's not really healthy. But Genos is aware of a lot here, because off panel, he was approached by one of the scouts of the Neo Heroes. The same way that we saw a couple chapters back that Excel was approached by a scout from the Hero Association, the same happened on the opposite end with Genos. But each and every one of the association scandals that are scheduled to be leaked soon could prove critically damaging. And that's really interesting, because it's like, wait, the scandals that are scheduled to be leaked soon, like there's going to be this huge revelation coming to the public about the Hero Association and the sneaky things that they've been doing behind the scenes that we saw Child Emperor was able to discover. And it's like, how does the Neo Heroes know this, and why are they telling the S-Class Heroes about this? I mean, I guess it's inevitable, but still. We also find out that the Neo Heroes have already surpassed 2,000 hero candidates compared to the 600 pro heroes of the Hero Association. That's another thing that we're finally finding out that I don't think we knew before. There's like 600 heroes in the Hero Association, and if you just go by the numbers that we have available to us, most of them in theory should be like C and B class heroes, because there's only 17 S class heroes, or somewhere around 17 or 18, and then there's like around 40 A class heroes. I think there's like less than 50. Now granted, we don't know all of the A class heroes and all the B and all the C, but just by my estimation, most of these heroes are like C and B class guys. So yeah, most of them are weaklings, which is understandable because there's only a select few people in the world who are like superhero level. He also says that they plan to enroll many strong individuals who have not yet been seen in the public eye or stood out up until now. And we've already seen this, like them recruiting Excel and Raiden, who very likely could be S-class level in strength, but they're definitely not the only ones. There's going to be more of these would-be S-class heroes out there, or just S-class hero level individuals that just haven't joined the Hero Association, but they've somehow been scouted by the Neo Heroes. So expect like these new powerful characters to spring up. Possible, maybe some we've already seen in the story that you wouldn't expect. But then Saitama asked Genos, like, you know, the reason you wanted to become stronger was some kind of revenge, right? And then the rampaging cyborg is brought up. Now, apparently this is like the literal translation for it, and they decided to go with this for now. But they are, of course, talking about the Mad Cyborg. It's the same thing. I'm gonna keep calling it the Mad Cyborg because that's what we've been calling it for years. But Saitama's like, you know, are you sure he's still alive? You know, we haven't heard from her or anything. And that's very true. And then Genos says something really interesting here. And he's like, however, there are some remaining records of the incidents from the same time period, which also document a particularly vicious monster. We didn't know about this before. Apparently there was also a monster around there, or from the same time period. And this is giving us more insight into possibly how the Mad Cyborg came to be, or what was going on at that time. Now, if you've been following my channel, you already know my theory on who the Mad Cyborg is, and I think it's Drive Knight. I'm not going to go into it. I've talked about it enough, and I have plenty of videos going over that topic. I'm actually going to come out with a new one soon, just so that a better resource for it is out there. But this monster could play into Drive Knight's origin into becoming the Mad Cyborg. Maybe that monster was sent by God, and maybe that's how he made Drive Knight into the Mad Cyborg. I mean, we saw in Blast's flashback that when he was fighting Elder Centipede, God appeared before him in like his Jupiter spherical form. So maybe Drive Knight originally was like a cyborg for justice, the way that Genos was. And when he was responding to this, you know, in theory monster attack that was going on, he was encountered by God and maybe accepted his influence unknowingly. Now I know that it's said that the Mad Cyborg became the Mad Cyborg during a botched brain surgery or something like that, but I don't know. We don't really know everything yet. We barely know anything. I mean, there's tons of people who don't think that Drive Knight is the Mad Cyborg, so still a lot more to go into this, but I do like the addition of us knowing that there was a vicious monster from the same time period. It's definitely going to come back for sure, and obviously it has something to do with God since it's a monster. But then Saitama's like, you know, but what if I killed it? Like, you know, I just randomly ran into him one day, killed him, and forgot about it. And Genos says the rampaging cyborg was extraordinarily powerful. You know, you probably would have remembered if you fought it. And Saitama's like, you know, I don't really remember most of the monsters I kill. And it's like, when this first first came out in the webcomic, I wondered, like, would Saitama remember that he fought Boros? I mean, technically he should, right? It was kind of a big deal. Aside from just his power, it was like a big event. But Genos was ultimately like, you know, if I do wind up finding him, I'm going to make sure I win. And it just goes back to, I think one is reminding us that the Mad Cyborg is a thing, first of all, because it is Genos' big ultimate story. But he's also maybe trying to put doubt in our minds, like, hey, maybe the Mad Cyborg isn't around anymore. Like, you know, why haven't we heard from him? Why haven't we seen him? Maybe he did die. Maybe Saitama killed him. It's like, no, of course not. It's because he's been Drive Knight this whole time, just hiding in plain sight. That's why we have been hearing about him. But it ultimately comes down to Genos saying that he's thinking about transferring over to the Neo Heroes. You know, going back to everything we've been talking about how he's been feeling stagnant. He wants a change of environment, possibly. The Hero Association, you know, their corruption coming to light soon. And then he even said that he can get Saitama to come over with him as well, because they, you know, they asked him to introduce any individuals he thought particularly high up. And Saitama's like, yeah, you know, I'm not really interested. Too much effort. And then Genos is like, all right, then I won't do it either. And that's where the chapter ends. So yeah, it's Genos and Saitama for sure staying in the Hero Association. But this is obviously just the beginning. And if you're curious about who of the S-Class are going to join the Neo Heroes, well, I don't want to influence your decision too much, but if you go through the last couple chapters, it's possible we may have seen some of the candidates already. Maybe the seeds have already been planted.
All right, so we got a special chapter here today because we're further exploring the dark side of the Hero Association, something that's going to be one of the main storylines going forward into this next long arc that's going to be spanning the next couple years. And this chapter focuses on the hero gambling aspect of it. So essentially, McCoy, one of the executives of the Hero Association and one of the main antagonists of this arc, who we've seen recurringly in these last couple chapters, along with some of the highest investors of the Hero Association, like these wealthy elites, I guess you could call them, have come together and made this, as it says, hero gambling scheme, where they straight up bet on heroes going against monsters. But of course, it's a rigged game, because it says that occasionally the matches are carefully rigged to allow only the major sponsors to win. And they do this by just straight up lying. So in this chapter, we see, for example, one hero taking on one monster. And they'll just basically say that the monster and the hero are stronger or weaker than they actually are. So in this case, we see the monster, Shiver Huwawa, being advertised as a demon level. But in actuality, it's a wolf level. Or at least to the assumption of McCoy and the Hero Association guys that were wrangling this monster illegally and secretly. Although there's like a double twist here because it actually is demon level, but we'll get into that. And as for the hero, it's B-Class rank 4, Mad Devil Yankee, but he's being advertised as C-Class rank 333, Papillion 800. This guy's also interesting because of his true ranking, you know, B-Class rank 4. We haven't seen this ranking before. Outside of the S-Class, a lot of the rankings are really spotty. Like, for example, in the B-Class, we've seen ranks 1 through 3, which is occupied by the main portion of the Fubuki group. And then after that, it was like rank 6 Wildhorn. And then after that, it was rank 20 Glasses, our boy of boys, who we haven't seen in many years still, but hopefully he'll come back in this arc, fingers crossed. So yeah, it's kind of interesting to see what rank 4 was, and it's this guy, Mad Devil Yankee. But they're doing this so that they can create a quote-unquote long shot win. You know, artificially inflate the betting odds. Because if this was like real life betting on a fight, it would be the equivalent of having like a journeyman or a newcomer taking on one of the, I guess, top ranked global fighters in the world, but then just lying about it. So you'd have more incentive to bet on the underdog, I guess, even though the odds would be severely stacked against them, such as it is in this chapter. But we also find out that McCoy was able to trap Yankee into being a part of this game because his mother is sick and needs treatment and is essentially reliant on the Hero Association's health insurance. I mean, that's not what is stated here, but that's essentially the gist of it. I mean, you'll understand if you're American watching this. McCoy also implies that if he doesn't go along with this, that his mother won't get the treatment and essentially will die. And to be honest, I think this is just an idle threat from McCoy. He's just saying this to get what he wants, but I don't think that he would have actually went through with it if Yankee didn't comply with him. Again, just my opinion, but I've been talking about this a lot with McCoy, and I think that he is definitely not a good guy, but not necessarily a truly despicable one. Like, he's left of evil, if you will. Somewhat of a gray character. And I think that's definitely going to be explored more later on in this chapter, but we'll get into that. So considering that this fight is rigged, there's also an acting element of it, where Yankee is going to act like he's having a competitive fight against this monster. Because in theory, a B-rank hero should be able to take down a wolf-level monster, because that's what they think is actually happening here, at least behind the scenes. The investors think that it's a C-class, low-ranked C-class going against a wolf level, which is somewhat of an even battle, but so Yankee has to act accordingly. And also McCoy is fully under the assumption that this is going to play out legitimately from his perspective. But that's not the case, as we see, because the Shiverwawa monster is extremely powerful. Like, he is legitimately demon level, because he just easily destroys Yankee with just one punch right in the beginning. And we find this out from the exposition that we get, because it says that this monster was monsterized due to turning distortedly wild from extreme miniaturization. It was a lapdog, so going outside causes it to rampage in fear and worry. We also get this flashback to the Hero Association, quote unquote, running high intensity tests on it. So I guess that, in combination with it being outside here and feeling threatened, has possibly caused it to undergo this rapid growth in strength and becoming a legitimate demon level. And yeah, there's no chance that a B-class hero, even rank 4, has any chance to take on a demon level, especially by themselves. Like, the official comparison was that you need at least one S-class hero to take on a demon level. Or you would need like a whole group of A-class heroes, and even then the odds are stacked against them. Like, that's how far the gap between S-class, demon levels, and everyone else is at this point. Like, I don't even know if all of the C-class heroes teaming up together would be able to take down a demon level. I mean, it would be extremely high diff if they could. So while Yankee is getting beaten down, we find out that he was inspired to become a hero by Moomin Rider, because when Moomin Rider was taking on Deep Sea King, he was actually in that crowd, in that shelter. This is important because later on in this arc, we're going to see that other heroes have actually been secretly inspired by Moomin Rider as well. But that's very far from now, but just keep that in mind. And just like Moon Rider versus Deep Sea King, this fight goes down the same way, with Yankee being extremely outmatched, getting beaten down within an inch of his life, but still getting up and not backing down and, trying to do right by his mother. But a funny little aspect of this is that McCoy thinks that this is like a performance from Yankee, because McCoy legitimately thinks that the Shiverwawa monster is a wolf. Like, he wasn't sending Yankee here to die or get destroyed secretly by this demon level, which is going back to what I was saying about McCoy being a gray area character, left of evil. He's not trying to legitimately kill him here. He's just mistaken like the rest of them. They didn't know that the monster was suddenly going to become demon level. I mean, they never truly know that he is. But before the monster's able to kill Yankee, Saitama suddenly shows up and one-shots it, similar to how he showed up to save Moomin Rider from Deep Sea King. Yankee actually recognizes Saitama from that moment as well, but he passes out. And of course, naturally, Saitama destroying this monster ruins the betting for the investors and ruins McCoy's reputation with them, of course. And afterwards, McCoy shows up and scolds Saitama for defeating the monster, which they're confused about because, they're none the wiser of what's going on here with the betting. And also, McCoy definitely isn't aware that Saitama is powerful because of this, because, goes back to him legitimately thinking that the Shiverwawa was a wolf level, and he also says that it was weakened by Yankee. So yeah, part of the course with characters being oblivious to Saitama's true strength, but of course it's way too soon for characters of this level to know the truth about him anyway. Then Child Emperor suddenly shows up as well and addresses McCoy's rigged game, essentially exposing him in front of Saitama and Genos here. But McCoy is able to leave before he gets further questioned. Then Child Emperor shows Saitama and Genos how the rigged game works and the website that it's tied to, and Saitama checks out his odds, and it turns out that he's like a ×20 underdog, which is like really insulting. And he's, of course, upset by this. Like, even Butterfly DX, who is one of his neighbors, who is like an A-class rank 16, is times 2.1. So, yeah. Another interesting thing here is that besides being a times 20 underdog, we see that Saitama's rank is A-class 29, which moved him up 10 places from his original 39. Now, Vib also points out at the end of this chapter that it is odd that that just suddenly happens. So, it could be a typo from the official, or it's just a quiet promotion that happened, possibly because, I don't know, maybe McCoy made it happen so that it would incentivize Saitama to not talk about the secret hero gambling stuff, maybe. But later on, Saitama and Genos are talking about the hero gambling. And Saitama says, you know, if we wanted to stop this stupid hero gambling BS, I was thinking the best way to do it might be, you know, make the house lose a ton of money, similar to how they just did by taking down the monster when he wasn't supposed to. So now that they have the website, they're tracking when the odds are published and they're going out to the next game that's happening. And we see that it's two heroes about to take on this huge monster. And Saitama's about to destroy it, you know, thwarting the odds again. But then suddenly this guy in a Formula 1 car like snatches some lady's purse. And now it puts Saitama in a conundrum and he's like, do I go after the guy who took the purse or do I stop the monster? And he winds up choosing to go after the Formula 1 purse snatcher guy and he gives it back to the lady. And we also find out that Tatsumaki had conveniently defeated the monster, so that, I guess, ruined the odds for the hero gambling anyway. Saitama then gets upset because he didn't get in on the money for the gambling, I suppose. But then the lady is just going to give him a reward from the purse anyway because it was full of keepsakes from her parents. And she gives him like a diamond ring, and he's enticed by it at first, but then it says that after a great deal of hesitation, he said he wasn't looking for money and returned it. And that's where the chapter ends. So yeah, really interesting one. I enjoyed it. It is a detour from the main story, I suppose, but it is still sticking to the overall linear narrative that this arc represents. Kind of reminds me of like the classic bonus chapters that we used to get like in the first 10 volumes or so, if you remember at that time.
So this chapter opens up in the mountains of G City, and we see Atomic Samurai's disciples talking about Amai Mask. This is because they spent a brief time with Amai Mask during the Monster Association arc, along with the private military group. During that sequence, the private military group was brainwashed by Super S's ability, and Amai Mask, instead of trying to save them, just straight up tried to kill them. But before he was able to do it, E-Iron was able to save them, and he says that he can only see a bloodthirsty homicidal maniac. So now that time has passed, they're like investigating Amai Mask and digging into his history, but they're not able to find anything. As Akame Itachi says, nothing is known about his history before his debut. But interestingly enough, we do know some stuff, not before his debut, but some stuff that hasn't really had light shed in the manga. It's actually revealed in the data book that came out like almost 10 years ago at this point, where it said that he used to wear a mask while performing his heroic activities, but an incident revealed his true face. And since then, he has not only been a hero and an idol, he is also a special advisor to the Association on Public Relations, and that formerly he was called Secret Mask, and he changed his name after his handsome face was revealed. But going further, E-Iron says that it looked like a monster without a human heart that was struggling to control itself and somehow get one. And that's pretty interesting considering what we've been talking about for a while now with Amai Mask. And I'll replay what I talked about last year. Way back in the previous arc, after Amai Mask had defeated Super S, we thought that he had killed her, but it turned out that he actually didn't. And when she woke up, she tasted his blood because she had stabbed him in the eye previously. She was like, this is monster blood. So that, along with Amai Mask being able to regenerate from said grievous injury, along with him being ripped in half by Fear Ugly and having his face smashed in, it's looking like Amai Mask is pretty much a monster at this point, or something like that at the minimum. So yeah, there's a lot of evidence against Amai Mask here, but Akame Itachi does say that if the face changes are not just a special ability but a sign of monsterization. Actually, it seemed to me like the area around his face was physically changing from emotional agitation. So the verdict is still out, but like I said, the evidence is really compounding against him. And considering that he's being talked about here and he has like that lingering storyline going on where he's becoming kind of subtly obsessed with Saitama since he's pretty much figured out that he is incredibly powerful. We for sure are going to get more insight into a My Mask as the story goes on. If not this year, then next year for sure, in my opinion. Then we cut to what is being called as the Reborn Council of Sword Masters. This is because 2 of them died in the Battle of the Cadres. And, maybe some of us thought that 3 of them died, but no, Nichiren is alive. And I know, yeah, it's kind of shocking because he had like half of his body melted off by Vomited Fear Ugly. He also took out the other 2 council members, but in one panel, after the Cadre battle was over and Fubuki was able to heal some people and they were kind of rounding up all the survivors, Spring Mustachio, who is Nichiren's student, grabbed him, and Fubuki was like, I don't know, had him on life support with her Esper healing powers or something. And Nichiren got cybernetic limbs. Not just legs, but like, I guess everything from the waist down is cyborg now. Even, the part that you're thinking of, I assume that is cybernetic as well. And it makes you think, like, what's going on with E-Iron? And I guess we could just assume that E-Iron doesn't want a cybernetic arm. Like, he's fine with just having a missing arm at this point. Like, he's just going Shanks mode. We even get some commentary on this from E-Iron, where he's like, because those who don't have something often know its value more, referring to his arm. But also referring to My Mask, of course. So yeah, anyone who was hoping for E-Iron to get a cybernetic arm, it's over. We can just move on at this point. And it's also probably for the best because we're going to see more characters with cybernetic parts and stuff, and it's all going to lead to something bad, I can assure you, especially Nichiren. Like, this isn't the end of Nichiren's story and his cybernetic lower half, and it doesn't have a good outcome in my opinion. That's not a spoiler. I'm just saying I'm pretty sure I see where this is going. But also, we're seeing that Amahare and Zanbai, the 2 other council members that were killed by Vomit If You're Ugly, had children, Yuta and Shido. And I don't know how powerful they are, but I assume they're not S-class level. They're probably like A-class heroes, maybe fringe S-class or something, but I can see them joining the Hero Association, especially because now that there is the Neo Heroes and there's going to be like a divide between the hero factions and everything, I'm sure there's going to be new recruits on both sides. And I think that not only them, but also Nichiren might join the Hero Association, because at the end of this sequence, he's like, maybe being a hero isn't too bad either. Then Nichiren starts talking to Atomic Samurai, and he shows him that even with his artificial body, he can still circulate his chi. And he does like this ultimate special slashing move on an apple, but he doesn't slice the apple, he slices like the rock face behind it. And it turns out that this is like a super ultimate ability that only the highest masters know. Where Atomic Samurai says, have you never seen this before? Nichiren's exquisite skill is such that his sword is so fast it doesn't even open up a cut. And that's because the apple hasn't even noticed it's been cut. And it's like, what? Yeah, I know. And webcomic readers, you know where this is going. But yeah, pretty fascinating concept here. Then Nichiren talks to Atomic Samurai more about being a hero and whatnot, especially because one of his big motivations in joining the Hero Association was to compete with Bang, who he never really competed with. He kind of just had small talk with him from time to time. But since his battle with the other heroes against Orochi and the Cadres, he's found new purpose, and he says, I get to experience things that I can't get anywhere else. So he's kind of at peace with being a hero now, despite Bang retiring. But then he also says, not to mention, among the top heroes, there's still a man whose true power is unfathomable to me. Speaking of King, of course, he says whether or not I continue depends on the appraisal of that guy. So that's like Atomic Samurai's new goalpost. He's found it in King, which is understandable because, everybody still thinks King is the one above all. Of course, this is showing Atomic Samurai's character development, as Nichiren points out here, saying you're more tolerant of others than you used to be. Shall I say you've broadened your outlook. Then we cut back to Saitama and Genos heading back to the Hero Association, and we see Forte has made a doghouse for Black S and Rover, and he's feeding them as well, and we see Black S is very happy to eat the food, and he's like, for now, I just need to devote myself to eating and increasing my cell count. Of course, this is alluding to Black S's inevitable comeback, which I do think is going to happen, but don't hold your breath on that. It's going to take a long time. He's still pretty much just a singular cell at this point. But Genos meets Forte in this sequence, and he finds out that Forte is Saitama's neighbor, and he pretty much forces him out of his apartment so that he can move next to Saitama. So I guess we're going to have that dynamic going forward. Then we cut back to the disciples in a sushi conveyor belt restaurant, and they're looking to get the best pieces of sushi, I suppose, and they're like asking for salmon and the fatty tuna and whatnot, but it's apparently been taken. And to be honest, I don't know why this is really an issue, because you can kind of just order what you want. Like, you don't have to be reliant on what's on the conveyor belt. But I guess this restaurant doesn't have the option of ordering for your specific table. But it doesn't matter, because this is a plot device for Atomic Samurai to confront King, because of course he is the one who took the fatty tuna. How convenient, because he's the one that he wanted to meet anyway. And he walks up to King and he's like, I never expected to see you here, Mr. Strongest Man on Earth. Came here today to meet you. I want to talk to you for a minute. And that's where the chapter ends. So picking up from the end of the previous chapter, we saw Atomic Samurai confronting King. Since Bang has retired from the Hero Association, Atomic Samurai is kind of looking like for a new strong hero to challenge or have like his rival, because I guess that's what Silver Fang originally represented to him. And as soon as he comes up to King, the disciples say that they hear the King engine has started. And the King engine, of course, is when King gets nervous and his heart starts beating really loud. But to everyone else, it signifies that he's ready to fight. And Atomic Samurai says, I've never confirmed the extent of your strength with my own eyes before, after all. And that's true for most characters, I suppose, because obviously King doesn't really have any feats of strength. His power is largely represented by Saitama's recorded feats against monsters. But I guess you could say that some of the heroes saw a pseudo feat from King in chapter 154 when he did his ultimate purgatory hellfire burst wave motion cannon. Of course, we the readers know it was Garo taking down the monsters in like a nanosecond or whatever. But to most of the people there, it looked like King was just doing this massive attack that took them all out. Then King starts choking on his sushi and he raises up his chopsticks, and Atomic Samurai thinks that that's him challenging him. Like chopsticks versus sword. So then Atomic Samurai atomic slashes an apple and throws it at King. And he's like, come on, step outside. Once they get outside, Atomic Samurai is like, this would be the best way to get a measure of your skill, right? Pretend I'm a monster and come at me. And of course, King can't come at him because he's weak. He actually says that to himself in this sequence. At times in the chapter, coming to the brink of exposing himself because he sees no other way out. And as he's like struggling with this, he even goes to the point of saying, help me. We could see what King looks like to everyone else. And he just looks so epic. We see E-Iron saying he's full of openings. No, he has no openings. This is hilarious, of course, for multiple reasons, but this is also how Garo saw King at first. When he was just standing on his bike with Saitama, he envisioned King defending from like every single angle at once. Then once King realizes that Atomic Samurai isn't gonna let up on him, he tries to talk no jutsu his way out of it. But it's the best talk no jutsu when it's not genuine and he's just pretty much lying. And he's like, aren't you forgetting that today is Tuesday? Looks like your disciples already realized. And once Atomic like demands further elaboration, King just goes off into this nonsensical retort and he's like, the atmosphere comprises of 80% nitrogen and 20% oxygen. And going further, he's like, then last Thursday there was a full moon, which means that today at noon exactly it changed into a dual squat phase. Some of us who have our antennas out regularly have already noticed it. The fact that it has begun. And of course, Atomic Samurai still doesn't get it because it's nonsense. And eventually King's just like, let's do this another day. Atomic Samurai's like, no, we're not done here. And then King hits him with the, both you and I we're heroes after all. Then that hits Atomic Samurai right in the feels because of the previous chapter. He and the Council of Swordsmen were discussing that stuff. Then Atomic Samurai asks him to wait. And King thinks that this is it. Like, there's just no escape. I can't talk no jutsu my way out of this. You know, maybe I'll just come clean and they'll let me off the hook. But obviously that's not the case. Atomic Samurai and the disciples are fully under the spell of King, whatever you want to call it. I'll go more into that at the end of the video. And Atomic Samurai is like, no, enough of this. I suppose it's just as you say, King, I was wrong. But then he asks King to cut the apple because, as he says, it's like some sort of palm reading because he can observe someone cutting an object with a sword and he can somehow read what kind of life they lived up until now. And that he performed the same test on the disciples. So King grabs the sword and it looks like he's about to cut the apple, but then over the span of 2 minutes and 40 seconds, he simply just takes the sword and places it back down. I mean, it takes him like 25 seconds just to put the sword on the ground. Then he gets up and says that he couldn't unsheath it and that his arms were at their limit just from holding that pose. Oh, this is just so good. It's classic one. And he realizes that they're glaring at him from behind, but then he's like, maybe I'll just try and head straight home like this. And he just walks away without saying anything. And this just blows Atomic Samurai and the disciples disciples away. Like, Atomic Samurai is sweating after this. And in his mind, he says that I couldn't even see his swordsmanship, his series of movements, I couldn't see any of it. And he compares him to Nichiren, saying that he cut the apple the same way that he did, without the apple realizing it's been cut. We saw Nichiren do that in the previous chapter. And if you read the webcomic, you immediately knew that it was talking about this sequence that just happened. But I thought that they maybe would have made this sequence even grander for King now, since Nichiren did it. You know, like King does something that not even Nichiren could have done. But I don't know, maybe this is supposed to hype up Nichiren as well, since he legitimately does this, as he says, perform the supernatural feat of slicing the blade through the gaps between the atoms. And then on top of that, he says the blade itself hasn't even realized it was unsheathed. So yeah, King being King has somewhat defeated Atomic Samurai, but it also made him have this huge revelation. I mean, it essentially should have been Nichiren who motivated King here, but I guess he needed to trick himself into seeing it from the perspective of another, because he's like, I have faced such great shame, going to redo my training from scratch. An endless road of hardship may be waiting. And this is definitely going to happen. Atomic Samurai is going to do some kind of training with the disciples, of course, and they're all going to get much stronger. Like, I think the disciples might reach S-class level soon, or at least the Iron will. And as for Atomic Samurai, he needs to get stronger because he seems to have a more important part in the story now, since Nichiren had given him the Sun Blade back in the Monster Association War. We also found out that there was the counterpart to it, the Moon Blade, which I for sure think belongs to one of God's top disciples. If not, eventually it will, if it doesn't already. So Atomic Samurai has to start getting stronger now. And aside from all that endgame stuff, just what's going to happen with the Neo Heroes, of course. And it's very possible that King himself might try to do the same thing. And that goes into another question, of course, and it's like, is King actually powerful? Does he have some kind of supernatural luck ability? And I was more hyped on this a couple years ago, but I think after the whole Cosmic Fear Garo thing, it's kind of dampened that in my eyes. Like, he was affected by his radiation and pretty much died in the previous timeline. You'd think that if he truly did have some kind of supernatural luck powers, he would have even been able to get out of that. But he didn't, because it's possible that it doesn't really go beyond skin deep. Like, maybe he just doesn't really have supernatural powers. He's just lucky in general, I suppose. I don't know, but... So this chapter starts off with us seeing Child Emperor working on the side of his laboratory, and he's been drifting further away from the Hero Association, and especially Metal Knight, because lately we've seen that he's been looking into the history of the association. And he gets a message from Zombie Man to meet up for milkshakes, and they do. And I'm not really sure what to make of what's going on with them. Like, it's like a weird friendship that they have. It feels like kind of shoehorned in. I'm not really sure why they are this way, but it eventually just reveals that Child Emperor is insecure about his name and that he's been made fun of because of it. And I'll just put the explanation here, what his name means and why, he doesn't like it. This is just adding fuel to the fire for Child Emperor. Like we've seen before, that he's already suspicious of the association because of the nefarious things they've been doing behind closed doors that we're going to completely find out about in this chapter. And now on top of his name, meaning what it does, it's just further showing us why he does what he does in this chapter. Then we come to the House of Evolution's takoyaki stand, and it turns out that Mosquito Girl is alive. Yeah, this was like a theory that had been going on in the community for years. And it turns out that she survived getting smacked by Saitama. I think it was like back in chapter 6, where you don't see her explicitly die. She kind of just gets slapped into the sky, in typical or even comical manga fashion. And in the anime, we do see like the blood go on the building, but I think that's just Saitama slapping like the blood sack thing on her back. And you actually do see her go into the sky as well in the anime, if you look closely enough. So yeah, she survived, and she's having like a hard face turn here, which is, understandable and needed. It's always nice to have new characters come in, especially female, which this series definitely needs. And I do think this means that the House of Evolution is definitely going to be like a force. It's still like a very relevant and viable faction in this world, but I think they're just kind of like faces now. Like, they obviously started off as heels, but now that they're still lingering, they have like, a great dynamic to them, and they're very likable. And I think that they're going to continue to be that way for like the rest of the series. But we see Zombie Man finally meet back up with Dr. Genus. The last time that they had talked, I think it was like chapter 86 in the Viz, when we found out about all that stuff with the limiter and
it relating to Saitama. And that's actually coming full circle here because they're talking about that again. Because Zombie Man tells Dr. Genus, he's like, hey, there's a guy that defeated Monster Garo with one hit. Because Zombie Man knows that it was Saitama that defeated Garo. Like, pretty much everyone else thinks it's Blast, but because he believes the testimony of Genos, he knows that Saitama is the one that defeated him. Therefore, he knows that Saitama is the one who removed his limiter, because Dr. Genus doesn't explicitly say that it was Saitama, but he just says, like, yeah, this guy who removed his limiter, he's like a hero, so you'll probably meet him one day. So now he finally understands what Dr. Genus was talking about, because before he didn't believe him. And now that he's seen it, he's like, hey, I want you to try and remove my limiter. And on paper, Zombie Man is a great candidate for this because of his ability, like, of regeneration. He should be able to speed run it in theory, because basically removing your limiter involves you like pushing yourself to the absolute limit, like coming close to death, but then not dying and then coming back, essentially. Like, that's how Garo and Saitama did it. But they didn't have regeneration abilities like Zombie Man, so he can obviously go much further than they did. But maybe it's not that easy. I mean, they're going to try something. Definitely something is going to happen, because Dr. Genus is like, hey, number 66, like that was Zombie Man's test subject number when Dr. Genus was experimenting on him when he was in the House of Evolution back in the day. And he's like, this shop actually has a basement. I've got something interesting down there to show you. And that was like a cliffhanger for a few years in the webcomic. And once we eventually found out what's down there, like, it delivered. So look forward to it, because it really brings a really great dynamic. And depending on how the manga is going to continue to adapt the webcomic continuity, we might see it sooner than later, or it might take a year to see it, but it's worth the payoff. It's actually still kind of ongoing in the webcomic as we speak, like Dr. Genus's basement storyline. We cut back to the Hero Association and we see that Snek is being given this case to go after this monster that killed a sponsor executive of the association. But it turns out that this is like busy work and it's not really even a case, because Child Emperor walks past Snek and he's like dressed differently and he's holding like a box with his stuff, like from his office, I guess. The cliche thing denoting that somebody has either been fired or leaving their job. And he reveals to Snek that among the executives in the Hero Association, there's individuals that are like running this black market monster trade where they're selling captured monsters and kaijus as like pets or ornaments or, trophies or whatever. And there's been multiple cases where some of those monsters that have been sold have like escaped and caused disasters and killed people and stuff. And that's been covered up by the association this whole time. Like, that was the case that Snek was given. Like, they already took care of it themselves, but they kept it quiet so no one would know. And they just have like actual heroes go on to the case to make it seem like it's being investigated cleanly when it's actually not. And it also gives the heroes like busy work. So this is like the big dark secret that Child Emperor was able to find when he went into the Hero Association system. And when he's talking about this, we see like this collage of like monster pictures. And on the bottom right, we see what looks to be Phoenix Man. Now, I don't know if this is like literally Phoenix Man, but it looks pretty much like him. And it makes me think like, oh, Phoenix Man was the one that kind of started all of this. Because when he connected with Child Emperor, like during their fight, they had like this Esper conversation. And that was like when the seeds of the Hero Association being corrupt was first told to Child Emperor, I suppose. And it was, difficult for Child Emperor to believe this because it was like Phoenix Man telling him and he didn't know where he got that information from. But now that we know that like these black market trade monsters escaped at points, it's very likely that they joined the Monster Association at some point too, because that's what Phoenix Man did. So maybe they just met that way, or they just heard through the grapevine that way about what was going on. I think that would be a cool way for him to know. Or if it's not that, then it's just like God somehow told him directly through the suit, which I don't know if it's canon or not that the suit speaks to Phoenix Man. I think that's been retconned, but yeah, either way, there is a reason why Phoenix Man knows and the reason why he told Child Emperor, and I think it's gonna come full circle like that. But then Child Emperor just leaves the Hero Association and gets immediately picked up by the Neo Heroes. And it's like, yeah, Child Emperor is now a Neo hero. Like, he left the Hero Association just like that. So this is the first S-Class hero coming over to the Neo heroes. We knew that this was going to happen, and they implied it was going to be multiple. So it's going to be more than Child Emperor. It's so crazy seeing them like leave, because, you know, for years we've been following the story like Child Emperor. He's been an S-Class hero, but now he's like leaving and joining the rival organization under the name Wild Emperor now. Yeah, I know. It's funny. I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be, but also the Japanese means what this means. You know, it's supposed to be the anti of what his original name was. So no one could get confused or make fun of him. We also see like this meeting with Amai Mask and some Hero Association executives, and he reveals to them that Child Emperor, before he had left, had come to, you know, the executives, you know, with a petition on how to improve the hero system and everything, including like staff restructuring, also a team that would specialize in countermeasures against major disaster levels of dragon and higher. And apparently in Japanese, this is written as Ryu Ijo, which means like above dragon. So Child Emperor looking out for those big threats, because obviously they're aware now that monsters keep getting stronger and stronger, and that dragon doesn't just mean, oh, send an S-Class hero. Sometimes obviously there's dragons that need like Tatsumaki or like, you know, the 3 top guys to take it on. And speaking of that, Amai Mask has like his own kind of plan, and it involves making what he says perfect hero, where he wants to make like an all-powerful mascot, like an All Might from My Hero, or like a Homelander from The Boys. Like, that's essentially what Amai Mask wants to do here, using Saitama, because Amai Mask is pretty sure that Saitama is very likely to be the strongest hero in the world, and he knows that he's not the strongest in the world, so that if Saitama is, then he can become what Amai Mask wanted to. Like, what he's trying to do with Saitama here is what Amai Mask was trying to do with himself. But I guess he's come to this point that he realizes that he has his limits, as we know our Saitama doesn't. And of course, the executives aren't like immediately super compliant with this. They are a little skeptical of it. And one of them is McCoy, and he just walks out of the meeting, and he has this inner monologue where he's basically heavily implying that he knows Amai Mask is a monster. How he knows this, not really sure, but he does know things and has a lot of connections, I guess. I don't know. I mean, I guess he just figured it out maybe through whatever. I don't know. But he's basically saying that if Amai Mask was revealed to be a monster soon, he can use that as a means to propel himself into the good graces of the Neo heroes. Like, this is what McCoy ultimately wants. He wants to jump ship to the Neo heroes just like Child Emperor did. But he's looking for the right opportunity. And he thinks that he can use Amai Mask's monster coming out party for that. And he also says that he'll bring them all the data he's accumulated from the association. Like, there's got to be some kind of contract you sign that prevents that, but all right, whatever, I guess you could do that. Then coming into the final sequence of the chapter, we see McCoy is on the phone with this guy named Ryumon. And Ryumon is a part of the Neo Heroes. We know that because his jacket says it, but it also turns out that Ryumon is responsible, or at least had the idea for the whole hero gambling thing that we saw a couple chapters back. And he wants to bring that over along with McCoy to the Neo Heroes. And then in the final double page here, we see the other top Neo Heroes. Like, this is the S-Class of the Neo heroes. Like, you basically could think of them as like the new S-Class heroes. So obviously it's not all of them, because there has to be more than this. And also Child Emperor isn't there. But if we're going to, you know, go through them, first of all, we have Child Emperor. He for sure is going to be one of them, because it only makes sense. He was an S-Class hero in the Hero Association, or should I say Wild Emperor. And then we've got Ryumon, the guy on the phone. He's going to be like an S-Class hero for the Neo heroes. Then we've got the 2 bald guys in the back. They look powerful, probably, right? Then we have a woman in the front. That's cool. Like I said, with the Mosquito Girl, always nice to have more powerful female characters in the series. Then we've got a guy that looks like Drive Knight sitting on the ledge, but pretty sure that's not Drive Knight, because Drive Knight has 1 eye, not 2. And then the guy standing next to him, standing up with the spiky hair, I think we might already know who this character is. And it's going to be like a huge twist when we see like, oh, it's him? Oh, that's crazy. He's a Neo hero? Like, I'm pretty sure we're going to get that reveal with him. But yeah, this is exciting stuff. Getting the reveal of like the new anti-S-Class heroes, and I can't wait. I hope we see it in the next chapter, but man, the story is so exciting right now. So many new storylines and characters are getting revealed left and right.
So coming into this chapter, we see Second Guard Gar returning his cyborg eye and hand because he's actually leaving the Hero Association to join the Neo Heroes. We're going to find out later on why he's doing this, but I just think it's funny in this sequence that McCoy is calling out Second Gar for leaving. And this is pretty much just McCoy projecting onto Second Gar because this is what McCoy actually wants to do. One does this a lot with his characters, and I really like that dynamic. It's one of the great aspects of his writing. McCoy eventually wants to leave the Hero Association himself and take all of the data and the knowledge that he has and give it to the Neo Heroes. But he's kind of just waiting for this catalyst to happen with the My Mask being exposed. McCoy's actually already in talks with the Neo Heroes. But later on, we see Second Gar going to a locker and he pulls out another cyborg hand and eye. And he starts talking to Child Emperor. We also find out that his original hand and eye was given to him by Bafoy, aka Metal Knight, and his new eye and hand is given to him by Child Emperor. And I've mentioned this before a few times, but I think that Second Gar's eye was supposed to represent like the Eye of Ra because it was on the right side. And considering that it was given to him by Metal Knight and now given to him by Child Emperor, I think that means that he's going to remain like good. You know what I mean? Because, right, good. If the eye were to be given to him by like Drive Knight or somebody from the Neo Heroes or the organization or something like that, then that would be bad. That would be the Eye of Horus, which is to the left. However, I do think that Second Gar will be corrupted towards the end of this arc for sure. It won't be through his eye or his hand, but it's going to be through another means. Another thing that makes me think that is Sitch says that Second Gar originally wanted to be a hero, which is pretty interesting. We didn't really know that before. To be honest, we didn't really know much about Second Gar, but I wonder what stopped him from being a hero. Maybe he lost his eye or something, or he just wasn't strong enough, and that's why he became an executive or something. But I do think he will 100% become a hero later on in this arc. Like, he'll fight and, monsters and stuff. I can't really say how he's going to be doing this because it's going to be a spoiler, but I can just say that he will receive the means to be able to become a hero. And that in itself is not a spoiler because Second Gar is exclusive to the manga. But we're also finding out in this sequence that both Child Emperor and Second Gar are willingly leaving the Hero Association to go undercover in the Neo Heroes. They want to figure out what exactly is going on with them, if they're developing any plans to counter the Hero Association, but they're also trying to find out what's going on with McCoy. Like, off panel, they've already figured out that McCoy is trying to betray the Hero Association, like we talked about. And I wonder how high this goes, because they straight up left, or at least Second Gar left, in front of like all of the executives. So if Second Gar and Child Emperor successfully do what they plan to do, can they just come back and be like, just kidding guys, we actually left to expose this stuff, but we're cool now. It's not only them that are leaving, but it's actually Metal Bat as well. And we also find out that Sitch is in on this plan, of course, but Metal Bat is leaving because he was recruited by Sitch to be Second Gar's bodyguard in the Neo Heroes. So now we have Child Emperor and Metal Bat, I guess, becoming like the new Neo Hero S-Class guys. And I'm not sure how I feel about this, because in the webcomic, Metal Bat and Child Emperor legitimately leave the Hero Association to join the Neo Heroes. Like, it's not to go undercover. It's like they've had enough of what's going on with the Hero Association and they genuinely decide to leave. Metal Bat doesn't really have too much of a motive in the webcomic, but he leaves nonetheless. And that created like real friction and real conflict between the heroes. And I like that. And it raised the stakes. Now that they're not like legitimately leaving, just going undercover, I think that kind of lowers the stakes and it won't give us like that true hero friction. You know what I mean? Although I might be jumping the gun because more heroes could leave, like legitimately leave, like they're not a part of this plan. So that would be cool if that happens, but it's not guaranteed. Although in the end of this arc, whenever that happens in a few years, I do think that we will see a hero civil war, whether they want it or not. Then we cut to Bang's dojo and everybody's there. Garo's there and he has like a haircut. Sharanko's there. Sour Face is there. And this is like
almost too good to be true. Like, this is what I always wanted, essentially. Like, I always wanted Garo to be training with Bang, and, you know, it's cool that Sharenko and Sourface are there, I guess, but I just didn't expect this to happen as quickly as it has. And I guess because I was originally going off of Garo's webcomic journey, which was much different than his journey in the manga. Like, after Garo loses the Saitama in the webcomic, he becomes like a lone wolf and goes into exile. As where in the manga, Garo kind of becomes like a flanderized version of himself. At least he definitely is in this chapter. Like, he goes full babyface after losing the Saitama, and he's kind of stayed the path of that, becoming like more of a likable character, I suppose, or being presented as more of a likable character. And I'm fine with it. I just like that he's training with Bang, and I just think it's a cool dynamic, and I'm looking forward to seeing where it goes. But turns out that Garo has to do like part-time work because it's a part of the rehabilitation program that the court ordered him, you know, because like somehow he got away with the whole Cosmic Fear Garo stuff, and this is like his slap on the wrist. Not community service, part-time work. Or at least I'm pretty sure that's what he's doing here. And if this plays out the way that Garo's story does, at least part of it in the webcomic, then I think I know what Garo is going to do. And it's going to lead to a pretty amazing sequence. Like, I think that's for sure going to happen in the manga. So look out for that. Whenever we come back to Garo, he's going to do something incredible. Or at least I think he is. But Garo leaving serves another purpose because King shows up. And Garo being there for King's appearance maybe would have made this sequence a little problematic. So I understand why Garo needed to get out of there. Although I would love to see Garo square off against King, just, you know, vanilla, with no one there to back up King. I would love to see how King gets out of that, or at least how one writes that sequence. But King has reached his breaking point, essentially. We just recently came off of those 2 chapters where he squared off against Atomic Samurai. And while he essentially defeated Atomic Samurai, I guess, and like totally destroyed his mind, it had the opposite effect on King, and he's come to the point of where he can't live this lie anymore. And despite him having some incredible moments in the Monster Association War, and, you know, both heroic and just epic, he now can't get by living this lie, being this symbol of absolute power. So he showed up to Bang since he's retired, and he says, you know, please make me stronger. And it's a pretty crazy final panel here. And it's like, is this the moment where King is exposed? Like, him asking Bang, you know, please make me stronger. Bang, you know, barely can even hear what he said before this. So all of that is already erased from this. But taking everything else into consideration, I don't think this is going to be King's moment. Although it is possible, but regardless, this is going to lead, I think, to King's next storyline, I suppose. But as for King being exposed at all, I wonder if that will ever happen. I mean, you figure that at some point, at least a few of the S-Class heroes have to realize that King is a weakling. Like, something has to happen. And it would also be crazy if one of them is like, yeah, I knew the whole time, I was just playing along. That would be crazy. But yeah, that's the end of the chapter.
So I want to talk about the new One Punch Man chapter, but before we get into the chapter itself, I mainly want to talk about the cover page because I think it's the most important thing coming out of this chapter. And on it, we see Saitama straight up bench pressing 2 Singularity. This is amazing. This is like one of the coolest things I've seen in battle manga. And let me just, you know, point out, of course, that this is just the cover page of the chapter. It's not like this is actually happening in the chapter itself or happening at some point in the story. It's kind of just like a fun little thing that Murata and One threw in there. Now, before I get into if this is like canonically how strong Saitama is, let me just explain what these singularities are. So a gravitational singularity, space-time singularity, or just singularity is a condition in which the gravity is predicted to be so intense that space-time itself would break down catastrophically. So it's like, how much does something like that weigh? And to be honest, I couldn't really find an answer. I don't know if there is an answer. It doesn't seem like theoretical physicists want to give us answers to questions like that because they'll say things like, well, it doesn't weigh. So I doubt you're going to get somebody to tell you, well, it weighs as much as like 13 galaxies, you know, which I was hoping I would get an answer for. But I think the main thing the reader is supposed to take away here is that Saitama is bench pressing unfathomable weight here. which is just further showing that, Saitama has unlimited strength. Now let's get into, is this canonically how strong Saitama is? And I think both yes and no. Yes, meaning that in theory, if he needed to, he could accomplish this feat. But currently, right now in the story, like Saitama in this chapter, if he were to just lay down on the bench and some godlike being dropped a bar on him with 2 singularities, I don't think he would start repping it out at that point. Because we found out that Saitama's power kind of needs to increase. He's not just statically at omnipotent god strength. Like when he was going against Cosmic Fear Garo, he incrementally kept getting stronger the more Garo pushed him. So in theory, the Saitama that was like sneezing away Jupiter, if you kept pushing that Saitama a little more up that graph, he for sure would have gotten to the point of where he was benching singularities. And yes, he probably could do it regardless because Saitama's power and strength just doesn't make sense anyway. We saw that he was grabbing Garo's portals, so I'm sure he could do something like this if he was pushed far enough. And I also think this is showing us what the inevitable future of One Punch Man is, at least at the top of the power scale. It's going to be like, space, cosmic, theoretical physics stuff. Because, we've already gotten to that point with the Cosmic Fear Garo battle, so it's only going to have to keep going up from there since the series essentially jumped the shark with him sneezing Jupiter away. But anyway, let's get into the chapter itself. So it opens up with King confronting Bang. We saw that he did this in the previous chapter, and he's asking Bang to make him stronger. And, Bang is confused by this. He's like, you're already the strongest. What can I teach you? And he's like, I myself, once back in the day, was untouchable. And when things happen that made me want to turn over a new leaf, I too struggled to decide how exactly I should use my power. And I thought if only I could become so overwhelmingly strong that I could negate all evil in the entire world. And we see him sitting on this rock by a waterfall. And I think this is like, for sure, post-explosion released fist Bang. Or when they used to call him Wind of Blood Bang, back in chapter 150. This is sometime after Bomb had, whooped him up and set him on a new path after he opened up his dojo. And also he has all those scars at this point. And I still don't think it's been revealed how he got all of those. I guess we're just led to believe that he was like fighting monsters, training or whatever. But Bang keeps going on with a monologue about how, we should use the power to develop, to lead the way for those who are weaker than us. And King's just like, no, you don't understand. I'm not talking about things at a grand scale like that. I'm saying I'm weak. I'm not anywhere close to being as strong as the man everyone thinks I am. And this is like for sure the closest King is getting to exposing himself in this series, which is pretty fascinating. Like Shiranko steps up and he says some really interesting stuff here. He's like, so the story about you flying into the sky and throwing that bomb that could have destroyed a solar system into a black hole, also you going back in time and knocking out a swarm of meteors and putting humanity back on the timeline we're on now, and the rumor that the majority of mythologies foreshadowed your birth. Now this is funny for multiple reasons. So first of all, this is like the rumors and the legends that you hear about King in the world of One Punch Man, but also I think this is one doing some meta commentary here. Because these 3 things, I think, tie into things that had actually happened in the story. So, going back in time, knocking out the meteors, setting humanity on the right timeline we're on, that obviously is calling out Garo and Saitama. Garo teaching Saitama to go back in time, as to where, Saitama knocked out Garo before he did all the Cosmic Fear stuff, setting humanity on the timeline that we're on now. And then the whole thing about throwing the bomb into a black hole, I think this is in reference to Blast and his team like sending Saitama and Garo colliding their serious punches away to Jupiter. And then the last thing about majority of mythologies foreshadowed your birth, I think this is a direct reference to God, because the mural and all the other things tied to him. So that's kind of cool if it is actually one doing that, and I'm pretty sure he is. There's no way it can be a coincidence. But Bang eventually sends King to other martial arts masters as he feels that he's of no help to him. And he sends him to Bomb. And Bomb shows him some cool displays of power, but Bomb eventually sends King somewhere else. And they also are unable to help King, and we find that King just keeps going around and around, and he keeps getting sent to different martial arts masters to learn different things, because it ultimately comes down to everyone knows that King is the strongest, or they think that he's the strongest, and there's nothing they can teach him, and they're also terrified of him, and they just want him to leave.
So he eventually gets to this cave in the mountains, which is apparently the legendary final training ground, where you must face one's true self to attain enlightenment. And King gets there and he sees like this mummified dude meditating, and he runs away. And originally in the webcomic, I thought that this was supposed to be like the guy reached his final journey by just meditating until he, self-mummified or whatever. And he legitimately became a mummy. But in the manga, he's alive. He was just kind of napping. So I thought that was a little funny joke to lighten up the sequence, I suppose. In the webcomic, it was a little darker, I guess. But as King is running down the steps, he sees Monako. And then she runs back into the bushes and runs away. We don't even see her again. We just see her silhouette. And that's interesting, right? Because we haven't seen Monako since the end of the Monster Association arc, and we know that Flashy Flash is looking for her. And Flashy Flash is also looking for Saitama, so I assume that Monako is going to come back into the story in these next couple chapters, and I wonder why they're being so secretive with her. What's the big deal with all of the intrigue here? Why are we supposed to be so interested? And it makes me think, there is more to Monako, and I think that she's eventually going to be like a heel. I don't think it will ultimately wind up with her being buddy-buddy with Flash. I mean, it might be like that in the beginning, but eventually she will be evil. But after that, we come back to King going to Saitama's apartment, and they're playing video games, and of course he's destroying Saitama. And after King tells Saitama everything he went through today, Saitama tells him, hey, just lift, dude. Which is, pretty good advice, not just for King, but for everybody listening. And it's very possible that King might take this advice. But there's a knock at the door, and it's Fubuki. She showed up once again to try to convince Saitama to join the Fubuki group, and she even has some beef with her. Until Rover comes out of nowhere and grabs the beef and eats it. The Fubuki group then wind up leaving and says that they'll be back. And after Rover starts chasing after them, I guess because he wants more food from them, and they run into this plant monster, and Rover destroys the plant monster. Even in his smaller form, he's still really powerful. I don't know how powerful the plant monster was. Could have been a tiger or a demon or something, but Rover's still pretty impressive to be able to destroy it at this point. And then it just cuts to them giving him more beef, and the narrator telling us that Rover has joined the Blizzard group, which is fascinating because this is brand new territory. This definitely did not happen in the webcomic. And I was curious as to what was going to happen with Rover going forward into the story. I think that Black S, I've said this before, is going to return to form being a top villain, and I thought that he was just going to bring Rover with him to the top, but maybe not now. Maybe he will just be him by himself or doing something else with another monster, but it seems like Rover is having a full face turn here, and I think he might be with the Blizzard group. That would be pretty cool. And also, they have history because Fubuki fought against Rover in the Monster Association arc with Bang and Bomb. Alright, so we got quite the chapter here today. And that's because I'm pretty sure the secret backstory of Saitama's final opponent, the final boss of One Punch Man, the character known as God, is being revealed and explained in this chapter. And if you're thinking wait, is it during all of this Cube and Cruel Dragon stuff? And yes, it is. Because I think all of that stuff is supposed to be analogous to the character God. And this is essentially hiding in plain sight, I suppose. Which is something that the creator of the series, likes to do from time to time. I mean, he really is a great writer. And before I go further, let me also just say that this is all just my opinion. It's not confirmed. I came across this from tons of research and going over a bunch of stuff. So take it with a grain of salt, of course. But anyway, in the beginning of this chapter, Saitama runs into these knight-looking guys fighting against these demonic martial artists. And they eventually tell him that, according to legend, a colossal dragon once ascended upon Earth. And just a few days, it took countless lives and scorched the land. And as a result of its actions, it became known as the Cruel Dragon. So I think the Cruel Dragon is supposed to be God, or represent the story of God. Meaning that wherever God came from, I don't know, out in the universe, the galaxy or wherever, this is supposed to be when he came to Earth. Or, to be honest, it could represent multiple planets that he came to, or just whatever main part of the galaxy or universe or whatever. I don't really know. I'm going to assume it's more so space-based at this point, considering what we're going to be talking about next.
Because going further, the Night Guy says that ancient soldiers gathered together and with a great many sacrifices managed to weaken the cruel dragon. Sealing orbs scattered the dragon's chi into 9 stones and sealed them in shrines in various places. So I think this is the biggest smoking gun here, and it's the 9 stones, because these stones obviously look like the cubes. I mean, they are cubes just with these little bubble things on them, but the cubes that Blast is looking for, you know, that Saitama, Flashy Flash, and Monako found underneath the Monster Association, and when you touch them, you're able to communicate with God. I think that this is like what happened to God back in the day, however long ago it happened. Ancient soldiers, whoever they were, I don't know. Maybe they were the original team that Blast is currently on, with those other presumably alien characters. I mean, at least definitely one of them is an alien, since it looks like Boros, but you know what I mean. Maybe there was always like this galactic police force or whatever out there, and they all got together, fought against this ultimate cosmic devil and God, weakened him, and then sealed his quote-unquote chi, as it says here with the dragon, into 9 stones. Now, they sealed his, I guess, energy or life force or whatever into those cubes and then scattered them across the universe. And that makes sense because I think we did see God's physical, like, tangible form, and it's in the moon. Because when Saitama was fighting Garo, they collided those serious punches, and Blast and his Guardians of the Galaxy like diverted the energy to like Jupiter, and we got that perspective of the moon, and we saw that crater in it with that like backbone sticking out, and we were all thinking like, what is that? And I'm pretty sure that's supposed to be God, but it's like his physical form that crashed into the moon somehow, maybe after he was defeated, having his chi scattered into those cubes. So that's 2, and we have like a 3rd instance of God being represented. I mean, outside of him like talking to people like with Homeless Emperor, but it's him trying to go through that seal, quote unquote, that Blast and his Guardians of the Galaxies are also repairing and protecting. And I'll go more into that later. But considering that we have those 3 instances of God like being separated from a complete form, I think that also goes into the 3 forms of God that we see, like the circulatory form in front of Homeless Emperor, the meaty form in front of Homeless Emperor, and then the almost, I guess, completed form that stood on top of the moon. And then there's like that 4th one that we saw in the fetal position that Saitama and Flash were able to see. But I digress. Going further, it says the duty of watching over the cruel dragon seals was passed on to our branch known as the Saints. And I think the Saints is, you know, like the Guardians of the Galaxy that Blast is working with. Now, I don't know if they're officially called the Saints, but I'm going to call them the Saints for now because it's like a nice little placeholder. Real quick, guys, can you follow me on TikTok, please? Yes, I do have a TikTok, and I've been uploading on it for the last couple months now. I have like over 250 followers right now, so thank you guys who are following me. But if you don't have time to watch my full videos during the day on YouTube, you can head over to TikTok and just catch me talking about the main stuff that happens in all of the series in like around 90 seconds or so. Also, please don't leave YouTube if you're going to TikTok. I don't want to divert traffic away from YouTube. But yeah, thanks guys, I appreciate it. And then it says that those who believe themselves to be dragonborn and are plotting to revive this sealed cruel dragon belong to an organization known as Deathbone. Now, I don't know if there's like literally an analog to Deathbone out there right now, like for God directly, the way that there is like the Guardians of the Galaxy with Blast, you know? But I think Deathbone more so represents the multiple factions on Earth that are indirectly working together to resurrect God, such as like Tsukuyomi with the Espers, Organization with the Cyborgs, and, you know, the defunct Monster Association. But those represented the 3 paths of God as well. So they all could be Deathbone, but earlier it's mentioned that there's like 9 warriors of the Dragon Alliance, like Saitama defeats one of them in the beginning. And I think that that could be hinting at like the 9 final disciples that God will have in the last arc that I've been talking about for a while now. Like God's anti-S class, I guess you could say. Like in theory, it could be like Apollo from Tsukuyomi, Phoenix Man, Black S, you know, characters like that. Drive Knight, you know, the usual suspects. But going further, they also say that this antagonism surrounding the cruel dragon seals has continued for 800 years. And I also think that's
going into how long the battle with God has been going on, because we saw that it goes all the way back to like Egyptian times. So more than 800 years at least for God's story, probably thousands of years, at least on a cosmic scale alone, not just counting like thousands of years on Earth. But after this, Saitama and the knights are able to like interrogate one of these Deathbone members. And then Saitama asks him like, so when will the Dragon Lord be resurrected? And the Deathbone guy's like, I don't know, maybe like 10 years, maybe like 100. And I also think this is like a parallel to God, of course, with it ultimately coming down to when Orochi will be born amongst the monsters, and when he will make his way to the altar and be placed on it, or when all of the cubes, however many there are collected. And I guess that resurrects him as well, which is why Blast is trying to stop that from happening by collecting them himself. The Deathbone guy also says that Lord Cruel Dragon has also been waiting for the seals to become weaker. And that goes back to what I was saying with Blast and his group repairing and protecting that seal in another dimension that's like holding God in place, whether it's like his soul or like his chi or life force or whatever, his essence. And then he finally says, in the off chance that Deathbone is wiped out, those who inherit our will shall appear and realize the revival. So that for sure is talking about Orochi, because we saw that on the altar underneath the Monster Association, there's a prophecy that Orochi will eventually be born. And when Orochi was born, he instinctively sought to go to the center of the earth to like suck the core of its energy, but he wound up finding the altar on his way there, which is not a coincidence. It's because it's like in his DNA, essentially, to do that. So Saitama's kind of gotten sick of this, and he just asks the Saints for all of the quick details, and he decides to speed run collecting all 9 stones and bring back the dragon just so he can defeat it and get it out of the way. And he does that, and we see the dragon, and it's pretty cool. Also, if you look at its eyes, they look like sunken in craters with like an orb or something at the bottom of them. And it goes back to what I was saying about when we saw God in the moon. I think that's supposed to represent that. Possibly, maybe? I don't know. But of course, Saitama just one punches the Cruel Dragon. And I don't know how strong this thing was. It was probably dragon level, Cruel Dragon, why not? But then we cut to Saitama with King, and it makes you think like, was this a dream sequence? And it's like, no, it definitely wasn't. We saw the Cruel Dragon Temple emerge from the ocean during Garo and Saitama's fight, so it's like that did actually happen, and it's all real stuff. And I think it's probably going to come back into play, at least with those temples, because why would we see that if it was just leading to this pseudo gag moment? But Flashy Flash shows up at Saitama's apartment, asking him to help him find Minako, because Flashy Flash thinks that Minako has information on God, which clearly she doesn't, but I'm pretty sure we're led to believe that Flashy Flash like has feelings for Minako and is looking for her to protect her, keep her safe, because he saw how vulnerable she is. Especially like when My Mask saw her, he almost killed her instantly. And it's understandable given their time together in the Monster Association arc. But then Flashy Flash says, I want even the smallest of clues regarding this god that Blast fought. I have a feeling that with just a few more small pieces, we can uncover a massive secret of this god. A secret so big it could shake the ground under our feet. And in my opinion, I think that this is a little meta dialogue from One here, talking about this chapter itself. With the beginning, all of that Deathbone stuff actually paralleling to the truth about God. I think that's what this dialogue for Flashy Flash is supposed to represent here. But of course, Saitama is not taking this seriously, and he's goofing around with Flashy Flash, who is asking him to become his disciple because he sees potential in him. Obviously, Flashy Flash is still in heavy delusion, despite seeing for himself that Saitama was much stronger than him. So it just gets to the point at the end of the chapter where Flashy Flash just challenges Saitama to a fight. And yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what's going to happen in the next chapter. We're going to see them square off, and considering that we already saw what happened when they faced off against each other before, we already know what's going to happen. I mean, it wasn't like a full-blown fight before. It was kind of just Flashy Flash attacking Saitama. But now we're going to see like, I don't know, like a full-blown, let's just say almost to the death fight possibly. And maybe it'll be interesting. Maybe it'll lead to something even more interesting. But let me know what you think about this chapter in the comments, guys. And if you liked the video, please give it a like. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one.